Tiny Home Symposium. This idea was born pretty simply. I can say one sentence about our purpose here today, and that is that in all our conversations that have to do with housing, we have determined that we would like to be the rural leader in smaller footprint homes. Our belief is that housing is a big topic, right? And we need housing all along the spectrum. And we believe there's a tremendous opportunity in smaller footprint homes, i.e. tiny homes, both traditional stick-built and other alternatives. And we decided what better place to start to really work on creativity in this area and identifying potential barriers, but also opportunities than Klamath County. One thing that I love about being your county commissioner, and one thing I love about working in Klamath, is that perhaps because we are a little more isolated, we're really good at working together. We're really good at bringing stakeholders together. Case in point, today you're all here based on one little flyer that was sent out to about 5 people. And I wanted to have a small stakeholder conversation around identifying potential barriers and opportunities to smaller footprint homes. And the word started to get around, and I had people calling me saying, may I attend? Can I invite a friend and look at this room? So it's a testament to the fact that we like to work together, we're good at working together, and it is my sincere belief that, again, we can be the leader in smaller footprint homes in rural communities in the state of Oregon and on the West Coast. We have a very, very, very special keynote speaker today. Before I introduce her, and I admit I'm sort of fangirling her because she is really, really amazing, and I can't believe we get to have her with us here this morning. We were going to get to have her here in person, but for very good reason. She was concerned about driving on the roads to get here on the highways. So next best thing, but we're still really glad to have her. But before I introduce her, because we are an approachable enough size group, I would like to do brief introductions in the room. So we'll all introduce ourselves, the panel will. So but we'll do just quick, name an organization really quickly around the room, and then we'll have our keynote, and then we'll have our panel, and we'll have time for an exercise at the end and questions. Fair? Head shake if you're with me still. Okay. Kelly Matee, what are your Klamath County commissioners?
Jennifer Fairfield, Fairfield Realty.
Mark Griffith, Director of Apprenticeships at Conway Community College.
Eric Noble, Klamath County Planning.
Alan Brown, Klamath County Building Official.
Stephanie Brown, Klamath County Community Development Department. Sarah Hill, Klamath County On-Site Septic Systems.
Jim.
You want to go? Janine Sheen, Finance Director, Scully. Please still Scully.
Bobby Goodkin, Telephone. Ian Gracie, Development Services at the City of Klamath Falls.
Dan Malcolm, the Executive Director of Klamath Housing Authority.
Michelle Scott, Housing Authority, the Homeownership Center.
Kenneth Ruthart, Housing Director for the Klamath Tribes.
Diego Diaz, Klamath County Economic Development.
Randy Cox, Klamath Economic Development.
Rhonda Nyseth, Office of Resilience and Emergency Management for the state.
Nolan Cochran, Klamath County Community Action Services.
Misty Daniel, Windermere Real Estate.
Teresa Foreman, City of Chilton.
Robert County, City of Chilton.
Julie Bells, here, this is the children.
Eric Masanga, Healthy Klamath, and the Outpost Builders.
Matthew Fairfield, Merrill City Planning Commission.
Teresa Edwards, Klamath Basin Home Builders Association.
Ali Salazar, Claudio Alvarez, Tiny Home Builder.
Joey Minear, Congressman Bence's office.
Zach Amy, Herald News.
Kathy Hill, Klamath Tribe Citizen.
Luke Daniels, Pacific Crest Federal Credit Union.
Terry Wells, Klamath County Health Resources.
I'm Rick Vaughn, Klamath County Tax Collector. Everybody's friend.
I owe you.
Brian, we smile. And sir, back in the corner. I'm not sure.
Yes, Mr. Landis.
Oh,
Mr. Landry,
Good morning.
Surveyor with our
Probably wondering why I called you later.
I'm Pete Seeger, and this is my business partner, Anthony Landis, Our Tiny Homes.
Joseph Reed, Bridge Smith.
And Haley Huffman's in the back corner, one of our all-star administrators that the county thinks. And Rick and Dale are doing our technical, this will be on YouTube later. If anyone feels very protective of your identity, I suggest you sort of hide from the camera. All right, so without further ado, Alana Cox is essentially the state building official, as Alan's our local building official. Alana Cox is at the state level sort of as high as you can go. I have asked her to be with us today because one of the goals, again, is to identify whether there are barriers to tiny home development that we in government, whether it's local or state, can work on tackling. Because it's really important to us that as we have this belief that we can be a leader, that government's not getting in the way. And in fact, not only do we not want to get in the way, but we want to help incentivize, support, and make it really easy. So what better way to identify challenges than to go straight to the top, and this woman is literally the top in the state of Oregon. So without further ado, Alana, take it away.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Herminti, and what a great room. I'm so sorry to not be there in person this morning. I'm a scaredy cat on the roads, and that trip check had me nervous yesterday, so I'm gonna pull up a quick PowerPoint and we'll get into it. Let's see. You all see that okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I'll start by just talking a little bit about what we do at the Building Codes Division. Our mission is to create the foundation for safe, efficient, affordable buildings in Oregon. And as you may guess, one of the main ways we do that is through adopting the state building code. Oregon has a pretty unique building code system. It's called a mini maxi code, and that means it's the minimum that a builder has to build to, the minimum standard, and then it's the maximum standard that a local government can enforce. And so it's really designed to create some great predictability across the state so that contractors can go from one jurisdiction to another and not have a patchwork of building code standards. And then we also have a unique statewide inspection system in Oregon. Oregon just does things differently, you know. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the state building code last year. So our state inspection system, we delegate authority from the state to operate local building departments. So if a city does not have a building program, it goes to the county. If the county doesn't have one, it goes to the state. So we operate several building departments in some Eastern Oregon counties. We issue plumbing, electrical, boiler, and elevator licenses in partnership with our licensing boards. We have seven governor-appointed Senate-confirmed boards at the Building Codes Division. We operate a permitting system called e-permitting, and it's available to local government at no cost to do electronic permitting. We have this state boiler and pressure vessel program, do all those inspections in the state, as well as elevators, escalators. And then relevant to this discussion today, we have the state prefabricated and modular structures program, and we do manufactured home inspections on behalf of the federal government. And then just a fun piece of trivia, we have the amusement ride program. So, a great intro, and so excited to hear about Klamath County's role in housing production and solving our affordable housing crisis. We're part of that all hands on deck approach, as everyone top of mind across the state has identified affordable housing as one of the main issues that's impacting their communities that we really want to tackle and address. And one way we know to do that is to build more housing. We just don't have enough. We have underbuilt for a long time, and we need all kinds of housing, all shapes and sizes, all housing types in terms of construction types, which I'll talk more about. And then one of the things we do at the Building Codes Division is we just provide great customer service, and that includes dispute resolution. And so, you know, when there's an issue between a contractor and a local building department, we can step in and help resolve that issue so that it can stay out of the courts and keep construction moving. We also can help run down things when they are issues at other agencies. So say there's an issue, I heard there's an on-site septic person, maybe there's a DEQ issue going on, we can help get involved and get that issue addressed for folks. And then we try to be really nimble because we know there's a lot of innovation in the housing space. And so the code is set up to be nimble, and we try to be really adaptive to kind of meet those changing needs of the construction community. So let's talk a little bit about construction types. Commissioner Minty mentioned it here, and I think tiny houses are such a great way to talk about our housing production needs in Oregon because they really cross every housing construction type. So the first type here is site construction. That's the traditional kind of, you're building a house on the site where it's going to be located. That type of construction follows the state building code, hopefully, and then it receives inspections from whoever that local inspection authority is. And then the ownership interest for those types of homes is in a recorded deed. Prefabricated construction, you'll see, is pretty similar. It follows the state building code, exactly the same standards as site-built construction. It receives inspections from the state in terms of what happens in the factory. And then it has the same kind of recorded deed process. And so that allows the state to step in and check on the things in the factory that are going to be covered in the walls that are an important part of inspecting. So if there's plumbing and electrical in the walls, we can do those inspections in the factory so that when it lands on the site, it only needs a site installation inspection. So there's some predictability there, and the state building code really supports prefabricated construction. And I think in the same way that Commissioner Minty wants Klamath County to be a leader in housing production and small footprint homes, we feel that way about prefabricated construction in Oregon because I think we're really well positioned having a consistent statewide code to really grow our prefabricated construction industry here in Oregon. So the other type of housing construction here is manufactured homes. These follow the federal building code set by HUD, Housing and Urban Development, and they receive a state inspection or there's customer choice to receive a third-party inspection. We do that in partnership with the federal government to go into those factories. And then your ownership is recorded either in a deed, if there's unity of ownership between the land and the home, or in a manufactured home ownership document. And we run that program at Building Codes Division to record security interests in manufactured homes. So another type of construction, I think relevant to the tiny house conversation, is wheeled structures. And this is where there's a ton of flexibility. There's no building code construction standards. These were deregulated back in 2019 in terms of construction code standards, and they're titled through DMV. So something like a traditional RV or a tiny house on wheels. Then I also wanted to note transitional housing. I think sometimes when folks are thinking about tiny houses, they might be thinking about these types of sleeping pods that are used in transitional housing. And this is an area of maximum flexibility and local discretion because folks are trying to be really creative to figure out how to address their homelessness crises across the state. And the building code, the state building code, only applies to shared facilities and plumbing and electrical work. So if there's a shared kitchen or shared bathroom, that kind of thing. And then there's complete local discretion to determine what the construction standards are for the sleeping units themselves. And that's in recognition that the safety plan for transitional housing could include things that are not construction elements. So maybe the fire service is involved in coming up with some other kind of fire plan to account for those risks that may be involved there. So I think, in the tiny house conversation, because there are so many construction types, sometimes folks talk past each other, and one person is asking questions about a wheeled structure and the person's answering about prefabricated construction or whatever it may be. So it's a little unique in the tiny house space, or it's called small homes in statute, in that the code is set in statute. So I've got the statute here, I'm sure you can't all read it, but basically there's a specific statute that says for small homes, which is homes 400 square feet in size or less, they're going to follow the National Model Code, which is what we use to promulgate our codes in Oregon, but we have a bunch of Oregon-specific amendments. This is just the straight-up model code and an appendix to that model code that addresses tiny homes. And then there's some specific kind of flexibility around sprinklers. I'll talk more about that a little bit. And then a bunch of discretion for local building officials to waive or modify the requirements for small homes. So that's how it stands today, rather than kind of being in our general code. It's got this specific statute, but that statute is about to sunset here. So starting in January 2026, unless the legislature does something differently, it's going to revert back to the regular building code that we adopt in partnership with our board here. But there's specific direction to us that when we adopt that building code, we need to allow for sleeping lofts and we need to allow for ladders or alternate tread devices. So the main issue in tiny homes, you could always build a small home under the code. The issue is that the design preference for including sleeping lofts, which makes a lot of sense to maximize the space, comes with some safety challenges. You may have heard the most dangerous thing you can do in a house is sleep, and the second most dangerous thing you can do is use the stairs. So there were concerns in the kind of code promulgation community about the safety of sleeping lofts. We have special code provisions for sleeping rooms, bedrooms, right? You need an emergency escape and rescue opening, that kind of thing. So that's really why there was kind of a tension around how should the code treat tiny houses. It's really how should the code allow for sleeping lofts and ladders instead of stairs to get to those sleeping lofts. So we'll talk more about where we think we're gonna go. But the most exciting thing about the sunset, and really I think one of the barriers and gaps in Oregon, from my point of view right now for tiny homes, is that they are excluded from the state prefab program. So when that statute was passed back in 2019 to create the specific code for them, they were carved out of prefab, so they're excluded from the definition of a prefab. And that means that manufacturers and customers have to work with individual local building departments to figure out how to inspect covered elements or get a factory inspection, or, to figure it out. And that can be tough if you're trying to do things at scale, right? If you're a manufacturer and you want to be able to send your product all over the state, that means you're going to have to work with folks all over the state to figure out how those products are going to be cited. And so it's why we have a state prefab program, is to avoid that outcome. So when the small home specialty code sunsets in 2026, prefabricated structures are going to be back in the state program. And so that will make things a lot more predictable, I think, for those prefab tiny house builders in Oregon. So when we adopted the code, what are we gonna do? And I really kind of want to be loud and proud about this, because I want folks who disagree to have an opportunity to go to the legislature and tell us, no, that's not where we want you to go. We've got a legislative session, long session next year. But basically what I envision is that when that sunsets and we're doing it in the code, we don't need to make a distinction between a house under 400 square foot and above 400 square foot. It's just a house. The difference is, does it have a sleeping loft or not? That statute specifically says we need to have provisions for sleeping lofts and ladders. And I anticipate that our code package is gonna look a lot like what is in the statute today, what's in the model code today. We'll go through a full process. But so that if you want a sleeping loft in any sized home, you're gonna need to do a little something extra, but I would like to get somewhere more prescriptive than what's in the code today. So basically, in statute now, I kind of told myself I wouldn't say sprinklers in this presentation. I'm gonna go ahead and say it and rip off the Band-Aid. The model code requires sprinklers. Oregon amends that out of the model code for residential construction. But then the statute kind of says, you can do sprinklers, but if you don't do sprinklers, do heat sensors or some other tool, or the building official can just kind of do whatever. And so I think we would like to support our building officials and our manufacturers by having maybe a more consistent, clear menu of some prescriptive options. There'll still be flexibility for the building official, but I think we recognize sprinklers are a pretty big barrier for folks for this type of construction for a small home. It's a pretty big requirement, and it can have impacts on water access and that kind of thing, depending on where the home is being sited. So I would like to be really clear about, if you're putting in a sleeping loft, what can you do? You can sprinkle, of course, but what else could you do to account for the safety hazard there? So we'll have a full process, and I'm really interested to hear folks' feedback on how things are working today so that we can address any of those barriers or gaps in the code. Some other considerations around tiny houses, obviously the building code is not the only thing that impacts, development of tiny houses. I think the regulatory distinctions between permanent and wheeled structures was a big deal back when that conversation was happening in 2019 in the legislature. I think that's clearer now, both on the ownership document side and on the construction standard side. But it gets pretty tough when you want to convert your wheeled structure into a permanent structure. And that's the area where we know there's some big challenges and some expectation problems. It sounds like you've got a lot of great planning professionals in the room, so I won't even begin to speak about land use and zoning, but I know that's a big issue for some of these smaller footprint homes. Financing is a big issue. And then a big opportunity, I think, is around density and ADUs, accessory dwelling units. So, part of housing production, the housing production conversation is how we get more density as we have less and less buildable land. And one of the tools that folks are really interested in is more accessory dwelling units. And an accessory dwelling unit could be a tiny house for sure. And so having clarity around the regulatory environment for tiny houses really supports that density goal and being able to have access to more accessory dwelling units that are affordable. And then I also wanted to flag that HUD has been kind of doing some work around allowing design choices for tiny homes in a manufactured home setting. And so that's just another area to watch as the federal government's looking at some of these creative ways to build tiny homes as a HUD product. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the conversations that are going on right now and themes related to building codes that could have an impact on small homes as we're talking about housing production. So we had the opportunity to support the Housing Production Advisory Council over the last year or so, and they've just submitted their report, and it has a number of recommendations, and then the legislature's taking some of them up already, so I'm gonna just call them ideas here, but one of them is ready build plans. So this is where the state or local government provides some plans, some building plans free of charge. And then you get to skip part of the plan review process because those plans are basically pre-approved. So we have some plans in the state for things like pole barns and carport covers and that kind of thing, but not for any residential structures. And some local governments, Medford, Salem, Bend, have put together local programs for ADU plans to provide those free of charge within their jurisdictions. And there's interest in the state creating some housing plans, including ADU plans. And so I think there's a real opportunity there again to bring the cost down for folks who want to put in a smaller footprint home. The code doesn't care whether it's accessory to another dwelling or it's just a dwelling. It's just a residential, plans. And so those will be available to folks to help bring down the cost of going through plan review, getting a designer to create plans, that kind of thing. Another conversation, and I should mention too, master plans is listed there. That's kind of the inverse. That's where you get your plans approved as a contractor, as a designer. You get them approved to be cited wherever. And they're master plans, and they can get approved to the standard master plans to be able to skip plan review and cite those plans in multiple places. Condo reform has been another conversation that I think creates some opportunities for small homes. So basically the idea here is that if we lower the statute of ultimate repose for basically suing about condo construction, then it will take down the cost of insuring and doing condo construction and make that a more viable tool. But then there would be some extra step up front, maybe extra inspections or something else to offset the consumer protection that's being lost from being able to sue for that period of time. I'm not doing it. The condo lawyers probably wouldn't like that in summary, but that's my best effort there. But I think generally we think of condos, or I think of condos as like a high rise, of where there's ownership of each unit. But one of the areas where there's a lot of attention around condo reform is to support cottage clusters. Again, as part of that density conversation. So rather than having to do land divisions to have, 6 cottages on a lot and cut that into 6 lots, you could make those cottages into a condo with an association, and that creates some opportunities around some shared utilities and other things. There's, I won't spend a bunch of time on the rest of this. I know I'm probably going over already as it is, but we're working on some other things around state agency coordination, and navigating the kind of complex regulatory landscape that exists for housing. And generally the metaphor I use here is housing is, the built environment is highly regulated. It's important that agencies, regulators stay in their lines of authority in their lane, but we need to be looking at our side view mirror to understand what the other cars on the road are doing so that we're not, causing accidents and making things really untenable for customers. So I think there's some room for improvement there. There's attention around being able to just turn things around faster and process improvement, turning around permits faster. And of course, to do that, we need the workforce to build these houses and to inspect these houses. So looking forward, I think as Commissioner Minty said, small homes are an important part of the solution on housing production. We need homes of all shapes and sizes, and we need all housing production types to be supported and have a really clear, predictable regulatory environment if we want to get out of our hole on housing production and really address our affordable housing crisis. And I'm feeling really optimistic. I've never seen kind of the entire enterprise more engaged on this topic than they are right now. Everyone's laser focused on it because it's impacting everyone's communities and the livability of their communities. So with that, I'll wrap it up, and I'm so excited to hear the rest of the conversation, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has along the way.
Thank you so much. And I think we will go ahead and pause for some questions, because I know when I'm in the audience, I always worry I'll forget my question if they wait until the end. So what questions do folks have? If you could raise your hand and, yes, sir.
A few notes, cottage clusters was a big deal to me. And if a tiny home cottage cluster is a possibility, also a master plan that might be included for tiny homes, on wheels or otherwise, foundation as well. Are any of these possible?
Alana, were you able to hear that? I can repeat the question.
If you could repeat that would be great. I think I got some keywords, but I might miss some stuff.
So the question was around cottage clusters and master plans. Are those in the works, and are those possible?
Yes. Do you mean for the plan for the community itself, or the plan for the individual cottages?
Both, but in a tiny home and or on wheels.
Both, and in a tiny home on wheels.
So I think for permanently sited tiny homes, yes. I said I wouldn't speak for the planners of the world, but basically, my hope is that we can partner up with the Department of Land Conservation and Development, where they would have some pre-approved planning plans that could line up with some pre-approved building plans. And one of the big opportunities that folks are talking about is around RV parks and around cottage clusters. And so, yes, I think that's where I see the biggest opportunity is if we can line up that planning stuff with the building stuff. We don't really have a touch point when it comes to tiny houses on wheels anymore, but certainly RV parks are one of the tools that's available for tiny houses on wheels, and there are conversations around pre-approved RV park plans.
Yes, Ian.
When it comes to tiny home clusters, are the homes, especially if they're fixed to the ground, are they on individual parcels? And what kind of size are those parcels, the lots for the tiny home clusters?
I think you can do it either way. You can either do land divisions. I don't know the size of the lot. That's kind of outside of my
Are they tiny, I'm assuming?
Yes, I think that's the idea, is you want some density in these cottage clusters. And so, you can do it either way. What we heard through the HPAC process when we were talking about this issue is that, to do the land division just takes a really long time and can be challenging. And I won't pretend to know exactly why that is, but because that's one way to do it, right? You can subdivide that lot into a bunch of smaller lots, and I think there was some changes around middle housing to make that easier, but maybe those haven't been fully realized, and the feedback from developers was that that's actually still pretty time consuming and challenging. And that's why there was an interest in streamlining our condo laws so that you could do it as condos instead of doing land division. So I think you can do it either way today, but there are some downsides that folks identify with either approach. I think condos can be expensive to develop because there's a lot of liability that comes with condos. A lot of that liability is because, we're a wet state in Oregon, and moisture intrusion can appear later for these multifamily condo things. And so we don't have that big a condo market in Oregon because folks have to get insurance to cover that liability that makes it expensive to do that. But on the other hand, to do the land division, that has its own challenges and pitfalls and can be a time-consuming process. So I think there's interest in making it easier to do both of those things, making it easier and faster to turn them into condos and have it be on one lot with condos for each of the cottages, and to do the land division and make that process faster and easier.
Thank you.
Questions?
I have a quick question. Since Senate Bill 1013 passed, do we see RV parks becoming, or RV vehicles becoming rental units and taking the place of tiny homes since that bill passed in July of last year?
And I'm not sure exactly, is that the one that lets you live in an RV park permanently?
Yes.
Yeah.
RV, an RV permanently.
In an RV permanently, yeah. So, there are some things in our regulatory environment that have been shifting, especially kind of in response to the homelessness crisis. And there is a disconnect, but I don't know if it's a bad thing, around RVs specifically. I think the reason, the whole premise for why RVs don't get the same level of construction standards is precisely because they are for temporary seasonal use, and our statutes still say that. But then elsewhere it says, but actually you can live in them permanently, and I think that's a recognition of what's just happening in real life. And so I don't know the answer to your question. I think, I don't know, you could oversolve either of those problems in that disconnect, right? And that could take away what's really kind of a transitional housing choice for folks to get them off the streets. And so it's a tough issue.
Yes, sir. And speak up.
In lieu of the clusters and RV parks, if you own your own private property, are you gonna be required to have a building permit? I understand septic for county and city regulations. For a wheeled structure, which is transitional, would a customer of mine be able to establish a tiny home with a septic and environmental takeoff or whatever the county needs? Could that, like you mentioned, in our day and time, we need to house 10 million people in our country. Can that become permanent residence? Would I require to, or the client, to update with foundations and et cetera, et cetera? Are these codes and violations that people are getting in the surrounding areas for trying to live on their property and then saying, I live in America, why can't I live on my property? A lot of them don't understand the environmental takeoffs, which I agree with. But we need to house millions of people, not in our area, but around the world in our country. Can these transitional wheeled structures become permanent?
Yes, I think there's maybe a couple different answers here. So basically, the building code doesn't really care if you're hooking up your RV to septic and other things. There are other local regulations, and I'm not sure it's totally consistent across I know that it's not totally consistent across the state. If you wanted to have kind of the regulatory benefits of having that be a permanent structure on a foundation, then there is a process to go through with your building department and a permit for that.
Which you mentioned earlier compared
But
to.
it's kind of, it's a gray area thing. It depends, I guess, is the short
Okay.
answer. And
Okay,
it
but
depends on
probably-
what questions you're asking and to whom. I don't know if I know Alan's in the room. I don't know how you've been treating those conversions there, Alan.
So, yeah, first thing, let's get the definition down, you know. A tiny home on wheels is really, it's not a home, it's an RV, okay, it's an RV. Goes through a different program, which doesn't go through the prefab programs or whatever. The reason is because it's an RV is because if you build it in a factory, you need to go through the prefab program because you have to have licensed journeyman plumbers and electricians installing that work, you know, to meet the state building codes requirements. So to build one under an RV, they're under the DMV like Elena said before, so you get them titled and registered as an RV. And also, she says that there is a conversion that you can convert an RV into a permanent structure, right? There's so many caveats with that. It may not be cost prohibitive. And here's, you know, the reason for it is somebody built that was unlicensed to do the plumbing and electrical. Now we've got to figure out if is it safe or not because it doesn't meet our building code standards for that, right? So that makes it tough. And then it has to meet the residential code, which now meets the energy codes, the fire and life safety codes, and all this other stuff. So to convert an RV is doable, but there are a lot of hurdles. Okay, so as long as we know the difference between, you know, if it's on wheels, it's an RV, right? And then if it's going to be a tiny home, it'll be on a permanent foundation. It can be site built or it can be manufactured through the prefab state building codes division.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, it's more of a response to Alan. So we're working on a model that can be taken off wheels, and we'll meet all those codes as long as we get it inspected. If that is possible, could that work? If I can connect it to a fixed concrete slab and require inspections, then I can take the wheels off as I want and then place it on the foundation.
So you as a manufacturer will have to get approved through the prefab structures program to become a certified prefab manufacturer. Then either the state of Oregon is going to inspect you, or they'll third party it out. Sometimes we do third parties for other manufacturers as well to verify it meets those the building codes for that. But here's the caveat. Your personnel have to be a journeyman plumber or journeyman electrician to install those two components to meet the state licensing requirements.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
If you're a private owner of the land and you want to build a tiny home, you have a right to build it yourself. You can do your own electricity, plumbing, all the codes and so forth. So if you build a tiny home on your property, then you don't have to have the professionals do that for you. That there is provisions for that with the tiny homes, and maybe it could also be a question related to pre-approved plans. If you have pre-approved plans that the owner can then build and then follow the rules, but you don't have to have all the professionals associated with that. Is that possible?
Correct.
Is that possible? A lot of
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that is true as long as it's not for resale. So you can't, build them yourself on your property itself. But if it's to live there, you can do it without licensing. You can do it yourself, and you could use our pre-approved plans to do it when we launch that program. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay. table, Fairfield Realty, that is doing some work in tiny homes. Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I'm Jennifer Fairfield. I own, I'm the principal
First,
broker.
can you hear her?
Okay, quiet. I'm the principal broker and owner of Fairfield Realty. I am so excited to see the growing interest in tiny homes in our community. I love that all of you are here right now. There's some big stakeholders in the room, and I'm excited to see what we come up with for the community. My interest in tiny homes started when I stayed at a tiny hotel in Portland. It's called Tiny Digs. It was just this cool community of, it was a hotel, and each person got their own tiny home, got to stay there. It was wagons, circle the wagon style, and it was very cool. It was community. I loved it, and I thought, we can do that here in Klamath for housing. It doesn't have to be a hotel. We can do that to house people. It's low cost. It builds community. So since then, I've been involved with tiniest homes on numerous levels, most notably the hashtag 48-hour tiny build by the Klamath Basin Home Builders Association. With that project, we have high school students partner with our local contractors and build a tiny home. It's actually parked right outside. If you're interested, you can buy a raffle ticket for $100. Anyway, I also helped consult on building 8 tiny homes for Project Homefront right here in Klamath. They provide transitional housing just north of town. So I wanted to start by just talking about the definition of a tiny home. As Alana mentioned, there's a lot of mixed terms going on when we talk about that. Next, we'll talk about who is interested in tiny homes, who's purchasing them, who's living in them. We'll look at some innovative models of different tiny home communities, and then talk about some challenges and next steps for wider adoption of tiny homes right here. So tiny homes typically range in size from 100 square feet to 400 square feet. There's always wiggle room. I've seen them smaller, I've seen them a little bigger. They tend to include living, sleeping, kitchen, and bathroom spaces. To me, without those, it's not a tiny home. It may be a sleeping pod, but it's not a tiny home. They can be mobile, they can be permanent, and it's their intended use that determines the applicable regulatory pathway. So if it's going to be for permanent living, temporary, or transitional housing, that's how you know which regulatory body you have to go to. Permanent tiny homes are built on a foundation. They have to go through, as Alana mentioned, the building permit process. For all intents and purposes, they're essentially a small house. They currently fall under the small house building code, the specialty building code. Temporary tiny homes are built on wheels or a chassis. That's, I think, what most of us think of when we think of a tiny home. It's a tiny home on wheels. They are either a recreational vehicle or a park model recreational vehicle. Mobility is the priority for that type of tiny home. And as Alana mentioned, the state building code does not regulate that type of tiny home. They instead are taken to the DMV through the Oregon Department of Transportation for titling, registration, and your manufacturing standards. The final type of tiny home, which throws a wrench into the whole works, is the transitional tiny homes. They're the most flexible, and they're regulated by the local government. So if the tiny home is designed for transitional use, short-term housing, emergency housing, disaster relief housing, it would be a transitional tiny home, and the local government gets to decide what regulations apply to that type of tiny home. Hopefully you all picked up the tiny home regulation brief at the side of the room. If you didn't, you are welcome to grab one. It goes into detail on those different types of tiny homes and where you can get more information on those codes that apply. So who's buying tiny homes? Who's interested in them? For the most part, tiny homes are attractive to individuals seeking to downsize. They want to embrace minimalist living or just reduce their environmental footprint. According to a 2022 survey, the average size of a tiny home for sale is only 225 square feet. That's smaller than most hotel rooms. In a similar survey, 56% of respondents indicated they would live in a tiny home. So there's high demand for this. Affordability is the biggest reason that people go tiny. Many tiny homes on land with several acres here in Oregon are available for under $150,000. I was looking last night, you can get 5.5 acres for about $140,000 with a tiny house sitting right on it. That's kind of the Klamath dream from what I hear from my clients. 86% of first-time home buyers indicated they would consider buying a tiny house as their first home. So there's massive demand for them. Tiny homes can be found in a variety of settings, and we touched a little on this. You find them in backyards, mobile home parks, undeveloped land, and increasingly tourist communities. They're also being developed to provide permanent or transitional housing for people experiencing homelessness. So kind of a big topic right now, the homelessness issue combined with just the lack of housing in general. So tiny homes on wheels are being used to help address that. They're useful in disaster relief if they're on wheels because they can be moved to the site very swiftly and allow the owners the freedom to stay on their property as they work to rebuild instead of being housed far from their land, making all of that more difficult. So there are a variety of models across the country for tiny home communities. I want to talk about just a few of them. The options are limitless. The mobile home park style is very common. Most often it's a tiny home on wheels, a park model, or an RV style tiny home on wheels. Residents live there, they have a 1-month lease or they have longer term leases, but it is designed for long-term housing. Some of the mobile home park style communities offer nightly stays. That way, if their residents have guests who are coming to visit, they can offer them an option for a place to stay without having to all try and fit in that 225 square feet, which can be difficult. Another model that is pretty innovative is a housing co-op. So in a housing co-op, the residents have an ownership stake in the co-op itself. So they live in the property, they pay their rent, part of that rent goes toward their ownership stake in the co-op. When they leave the co-op, they can cash out essentially, similar to selling your home, not quite the same, but similar. So they would then have money for a down payment to perhaps move into a different type of housing. One example of that is Emerald Village in Eugene, Oregon. The most exciting type for me is the micro lots. We had mentioned earlier smaller lot sizes. Detroit, Michigan has a tiny home community with 30 by 100-foot lots. They are generously sized compared to the size of the tiny home itself. The residents there are able to have a yard, they're able to have a deck off of their tiny home. And that specific community is tailored toward helping people experiencing homelessness get off the streets and into stable housing. So in that model, those residents pay rent for 7 years, and at the end of that 7 years, they're given the opportunity to purchase that home on that micro lot, so that they have that home ownership. Super exciting to me. I think that would be a viable option here in Klamath, looking at micro lots. It goes right along with cottage clusters. Maybe they're the same things with different words. That's one of the things that makes this industry difficult is it's new, so everyone has different words, often for the same things. Some of the barriers to overcome before we see widespread adoption in tiny homes is just that uncertainty. People don't have enough information to make a decision regarding a tiny home. They don't know the resale value. They don't know if they can get insurance on it. They don't know how they're going to finance it. They don't know if they can connect it to utilities. There's so many issues that they don't know, and often it's a barrier to making that decision. So we can address this on the county level by actively working to disseminate our policies regarding tiny homes, small houses, tiny homes on wheels. Education really is the key to helping push that along. Another barrier is financing. There are very limited financing options for small homes as compared to traditional homes. One of the reasons for that is most lenders don't do mortgages on RVs. That's not a thing, so if it's on wheels, it's very difficult to finance. If it's on a permanent foundation, we don't have good comparable sales in Klamath County for lenders to say, yeah, I believe that this is going to be worth this much money. So often tiny home owners will take out a personal loan or they will borrow from family members to finance their tiny homes. As we get more tiny home sales in Klamath County, our lenders will be more able to serve that local demand. The biggest barrier is, of course, zoning and regulations. Our local governments often don't have set policies regarding the placement, the size, the long-term use of the different types of tiny homes. When they do, the rules can be opaque and difficult to navigate. So counties can choose to adopt policies allowing for smaller lot sizes, which could increase the affordability of the permanent tiny homes. The permanent tiny homes are the easiest to get through the regulatory process for full-time living. And then just increased flexibility and transparency in the process will go a long way toward establishing Klamath County as the rural leader in tiny homes. They're a unique and appealing housing solution. There's definitely some challenges. I think as a community, we can continue to address these barriers, continue to innovate, and we can make tiny homes an accessible and sustainable housing option for our community. Thank you.
Any questions for Jennifer?
Actually, Jennifer, I know you've been studying it for a long time. If you come across some model zoning ordinances for tiny home clusters, I'd like to see.
Okay, I will send something your way.
Other questions? In addition to the county, I love having the city of Chillicothe here. You know, it's localities or municipalities can really start to be at the forefront of this. So, well, and of course the city of Klamath Falls too. So thank you to our friends at the cities in the county for being here as well. Okay, I think I'll move us down the line. Mark.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Mark Griffith. I'm the director of apprenticeships
You're gonna have to speak up.
Klamath Community College. All right. Ready?
Can everyone hear Mark?
Can you hear me okay?
No.
I'll shout a little bit louder. Okay. All right. So as the director, my primary interest is the development, workforce development, apprenticeship. In that instructional process, we've developed many strategic partners, apprenticeship. We work closely with general contractors and many other contractors that are working in this realm in the tiny house space. One of our strategic partners and one of our best partners is Klamath Home Builders Association through the Build My Future event that they have every year. They built 2 tiny homes this year. One was donated to Project Homefront. The other, as Jen mentioned, is available for raffle. You guys can see that after today's, after we have our conversation today. So we do that with partners like Concept and Designs. Alex Salazar back there has been in this space for some time and has really carved out a path for tiny homes to exist in our community. Additionally, in the Build My Future event, to develop these tiny homes, we had an economic development grant of $30,000 that supported us in that. We had Henley High School students involved throughout the process. We partnered closely with Henley High School. They are one of our pre-apprenticeship partners. And those kids really got the opportunity, in addition to the kids on the day of the event, really got to get hands-on and go through the building process, pull electrical, do work in the plumbing, do the framing and building in partnership with our local contractors. We had various donors, Diamond Home Improvement, Tile Depot, and so we intend to repeat this process again through Build My Future next year. 2 tiny houses was a lot this year. I think we're just going to do 1, but again, it's a fantastic event. It's a fantastic opportunity for workforce development, for kids to get involved in the trades, and really that's what this space is going to need if we're going to continue to push the tiny home agenda. I think I can really shed some light on what Alana mentioned earlier regarding the transitional housing and tiny home clusters. So KCC apprenticeship, this year actually in March, we are partnering with ODE, the Oregon Department of Education, and the Oregon Housing Authority for an event called Build Team Oregon Tiny House Project. And this is right in that space of the pre-approved plans, the pre-approved materials list. To essentially, we'll build a package that can be delivered to a high school, for instance, so that, again, we get robust workforce training, and we can produce these tiny cottages. Just as of just Friday last week, I finally got an update to what the final footprint of one of these tiny cottages looks like. It's going to be an 8x16 floor plan. And again, this is just built in with power, no plumbing, for the cottage clusters. There'll be a multi-million-dollar grant coming down from the state of Oregon to support this transitional housing and tiny homes. This will kind of meet the governor's housing initiative as well, so it'll be a big part of that. And we're also partnering, KCC partners with AGC, Southern Oregon STEM, and Southern Oregon CTE to get this done. And we're really excited to have this event in March. We'll produce the first two, and from there we're establishing a delivery process so that any area high school that's actually building one of these cottages, it'll be picked up and it'll be delivered to the specified location where they're going to kind of hatch these cottage clusters. So, additionally, strategic partners. One of our best contractors in this realm is IntelliFab. KCC has partnered with them in the past for workforce collaboration, just to help them have skilled laborers so that they can meet their production requirements. Recently, IntelliFab was awarded the Modular Housing Development Grant, which is fantastic. They're going to be able to ramp up their delivery in tiny homes, and they're already in the space producing, correct me if I'm wrong, Bobby, a 400 square foot tiny home that can be implemented, delivered, and it's all complete. So, but I see a great opportunity here for workforce development, for the production of tiny homes, and I think we'll continue to see this space grow.
Any questions of Mark? All right, next up, our County Planning Director, Eric Noble.
Hello. I think this microphone's just for the TV, so I'll have to shout. I love questions, so jot them down. Ask me a hard one. I love that. So tiny homes. I work in the planning department. We talk tiny homes every day. We probably process about 60 calls on a daily basis. As you know, we have thousands of acres of land in Klamath County. We have thousands of rural residential lots out there. And we get calls from all over the country every day. Arkansas, Michigan, New York, everyone wanting to come to Klamath Falls or Klamath County to build their dream tiny little home. So we talk to people a lot about tiny homes, but we don't use definitions. We don't categorize things as tiny homes or castles or ranches. They're all just dwelling units to us. What we worry about is density. How many dwelling units you're going to put on per acre? How many homes are you going to put on per lot? So that's really planning's thing is, how do we do this? And if we scrub away all the definitions of tiny homes, if you think about it, this is really not a new phenomenon. A lot of people say it's new, but it's not really new. In the 30s, we went through the Great Depression, and we had a lot of homeless or unsheltered people then. And if you go to like Gilchrist, all that housing they have for the mill workers back then, that was small homes. If you go to East Maine in Klamath Falls, we have small homes that were built for the railroad. We've been doing these small homes forever. And if we scrub away the cluster thing, if you go and you think about it, we've done a similar project in Klamath County already. We have Falcon Heights. We have Shieldcrest. The city has out there at Harbor Isles where there's condos and that sort of stuff. These mechanisms already are in place. we just have to scrub away our definition and say we're doing something unique with tiny homes. We're just putting housing units there. So we can do that through like a planned unit development type thing where we look at a subdivision and say, to help out the community, we're gonna do something a little bit different here. And we do a planned unit development. Most people, when they say planned unit development, they think Bridgewater or Running Wine or something like that. It doesn't have to be that way. It can be something smaller for workhouse development and that sort of stuff. So really, you know, the plans are in place and we have done this back in the past and all that. We just have to scrub away definition and look at just a housing unit. What is a housing unit? And get those established in there. I'd gladly take any questions that people have.
What about pre-planned and approved housing units for Klamath County? So if you have land and you have the full buildings are approved, can you have that done so that someone just takes them and get it approved and put it on their land?
Yeah, there has been some talk on establishing a few different plans, pre-planned housing. Not just tiny homes, but maybe something like 1,200 square feet and maybe something even bigger. I reached out to some building departments and community development departments across the state. And what I found was there are several cities that have them. Most of them are just simply what is referred to as accessory dwelling unit, to go in the backyard on that. So there's several communities that have that. There's 3 or 4 that have a drawing for a 1,200 square foot standard house too. What I found out when I visited with them is those are hardly used. I think the Lane County has one, and they've only 2 people have chosen to use that plan. I also talked to Brent Brewer, and I don't know if you know, Brent Brewer is a designer here. He has about 500 different plans on his shelf. So you can go visit with Brent Brewer and pull off a shelf plan, he'd sell it to you for $1,000. What he said is he has never sold a plan. Everyone unrolls the plan and they look and go, oh my gosh, I would like a covered thing here, and I would like this wall gone and do this. They want to make, if you're building a home, you want it customized to your own personal need. And so with that, I don't know how, I mean, we're going to continue to research this, but right now I'm thinking, I'm not sure how beneficial that would be to keep one in stock and in compliance. So again, going back to my conversation with Lane County, there's some changes that are happening in the building codes right now. So now they have to go back and redraft that ready-made plan to make sure that meets the, so there's that discussion we have to have. Is it worth, if very few people are going to use the plan, is it going to be worth your money, because you're paying the government, your money to go and make sure that plan keeps coming up to date?
Well, the problem that an individual has to go to a designer is you have to put out the money for that.
Yes, you do.
And I've done that, and planners are not that skilled in a way. And you have to still pay the $1,000 or $2,000 for nothing. So the county, using its resources, could have at least a set of plans that would be approved, and like the pole buildings, they could be adjusted by the county. So it is a benefit to the community as a whole to have those available if you're going to put it on a small lot. I would like to have a unit, and I don't know how to redefine it, but accessory dwelling units and tiny homes seem to be very similar. I don't know if that ADU has to be attached to the current resident or detached, that type of thing. Because if it's detached, it's a tiny home. That type of thing. But it is an advantage for an individual to come to the department and to find out what needs to be done, because all the inspections are going to be through that department. And if you already have it available, you don't have to deal with some of those issues. So that's my point. Yes.
Thank you. Oh.
Rhonda, and then we'll go to the back.
I have a question, maybe it's more of a statement, but you know, we've touched on sewer, we've touched on building codes, but what about access to water? and clean water. So, you know, are these tiny homes gonna have internal or external water storage? Cause that is, you know, a new theme, as well as, or is every property gonna have to dig a well? And then are some of these clusters gonna have to have community wells to serve all these houses with water? I mean, there's lots of funding through the USDA for community wells and community well infrastructure for your cluster concept, but what about for the property owner that, you know, has 5 acres and wants a tiny home? Are they just gonna have water storage like with water tanks, or are they gonna have to dig a well? Just out of curiosity, or just to put that out there.
You know, from a planning point of view, you have to have water on your property, so that can be a cistern or it can be a well. Unless you're inside the urban growth boundary, then you have to hook up to the city water.
So
You also have to have a septic system, right?
Yes, of course, you have to have a septic system. Or if you're inside the urban growth boundary, you have to hook up to the city or South Suburban Sanitary District.
So Alan, you can add, and also we do have Sarah Hill in the room as our resident expert too.
Sure.
We can call her.
So yeah, just to expand a little bit, you know, the building code said that you have to have sanitation, so you have to have hot and cold running water. As well, how you get that depends on, you know, there are some cisterns and some wells and, you know, the other sources, but you do have to have the water and the septic systems. And Sarah helped me out on this. If they chose, and I don't know, this would be up to Eric to start with as far as composting toilets and things, but you still have to have the septic system for gray water and everything else as well. So you might as well have your sewer system anyway, correct?
Correct, you must have a septic system if you're not connected to a sewer district.
My question is, a big thing is financing. Can we get the building department to start working with the public, a down payment, a monthly, for fees, for plan changes, for inspections? That's what's keeping the 10 million people in the United States, I correct myself, it's the United States that are unhoused and the rest of the world, but it comes down to financing. The county and the building department, I grew up in the building department. And it's money, money, money. All you guys are about money up there. Why can't we start a program in the Klamath County to help people get building permits and approve plans?
So we do have that. So just to help you out a little bit, as far as the facts are, for every dollar your valuation of your project is, we only charge 2 pennies out of that. So it's 2% is what the building permits are for your total valuation.
And our tax man's right there on our side and our worth of our property. But it's coming down to the public and our economy. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you. It sucks out here. We're up against the wall.
So again, with your fees or whatever, you know, you're blaming just the building department.
No, I'm not blaming. I'm asking for some help for the public. I rephrase it.
So
I don't blame you.
I'm gonna step in because the county started a 50% off building permits program in 2020-ish or 2021. So that's an effort that we've made that our county is doing that is not necessarily being repeated across the state because of your exact point. We want to help, and this is also part of this brainstorming here today, is looking at other alternatives. We also have community partners in the room like the Housing Authority and others that also probably have programs or opportunities, whether it's USDA. I think you bring up a great point about financing, and that
My interjection.
yeah, not quite yet. So the financing piece, we do have one person in the room, and that has been identified as a potential barrier. So I do want to allow Pacific Crest to speak to whether there are financing programs, and I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but if there are financing programs specific for tiny house, or how maybe as a collective, as a community, if there's anything we can do to advocate for that. So I'm going to ask him to speak, because you've heard. So.
Yeah, the one thing, our tiny homes, what my belief and base is to house people on a low budget. But
So this first, you had some questions about that. It reminded me of a manufactured home. You know, it comes on the wheels. you can make it real property instead of personal property. Once it's made real property, there's financing options potentially available. The tiny home part, like a secondary market, you're gonna have a lot of problems. They're gonna say, Jennifer brought it up, comps, well, I don't have 3 sold within the last 6 months at the same square footage. The adjustments are too large, that sort of thing. So that's a really big, it creates mortgages really hard, I would say, for sure. So I did jot down a couple thoughts, and I am on the spot here, and I'm here to gather information just to start thinking about it. I don't have any real programs yet, just so everyone knows. But for the person wanting to build like an additional dwelling on their property, those seem to be a little easier. We've helped a lot of people with that, and that they already own the home. A lot of people have equity in their homes right now. We do a lot of home equity line of credits. Someone can take out $100,000 of their equity, build whatever they want on the property, go through the right, permits and everything they need to do. But as far as, financing for someone that owns the property home already and wants to put that on there, that's a common way for us to help is through home equity line of credit. That doesn't help a lot of people in the room and the concepts here. So that's what, just a couple percent of the people, so that doesn't really help. But that is one area. As far as we do offer mortgages and portfolio through Pacific Crest, which means we keep the mortgage. We're not selling the Fannie and Freddie secondary market. We keep them on the books. We do have a lot more flexibility in that case because we're a local lender. We understand the local area and problems, and we don't do 100% financing on a portfolio loan. You have to have at least 20% down. So there's a barrier for a lot of people because they don't have the money and they want to buy a small home because they can't afford a normal home, and so like that brings its own problem. They don't have the money down. But if someone had 20% down and somehow we were able to get a little relaxed on the comps, like, we'll allow a little bigger adjustments. This house is 900 square foot, this one's 500 or 400, so we have some flexibility there as far as that goes, but it does require some investment from the borrower, and it has to be real property. So that's your on a foundation now. If someone wanted to purchase one on wheels, and I hope I'm not taking too much time here, that gets a little complicated for us as an institution, at least right now. It's kind of an RV, like everyone said, right? We finance RVs, but you can't use it for permanent living. That's one of our rules, and pretty much any credit union, any bank that does RV financing, it's got to be for temporary use. It's not for your permanent house because they're not built for living in 365 days a year. The plumbing's not there. A lot of that stuff. So that's a problem. If someone says, hey, I want to buy a tiny house on wheels, I don't have a loan program. That's not a personal loan. And I don't know how much these are running, but they're not inexpensive per se. How much is that one out there would run?
About 80,000.
80,000. So there's very few people in this world that can go get a signature loan for 80 grand, right? So that's the other problem is, personal loans. You could get a home equity line of credit, use that money for whatever legal purpose you want to buy with. That's where our HELOCs, we do a lot of them every month because it gives flexibility for whatever you want to do. But, so, if we were to do some sort of RV lending program, the other part is if they live in it, you can't repossess it if they stop paying like you can a car, truck, RV. It has now been their permanent residence, and you have a 2-year foreclosure process on a house that's not really, these are designed to be lived in year round, but, an RV isn't. So, that's where a lot of the problems come in as far as financing goes. And that's why I'm kind of here. I'm like, just trying to think and,
We're so grateful that you're here.
Yeah.
So I'll do 2 more questions and then I'm going to move us on. So and it's got to be a question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have we lost sight of where we are? This is Klamath County, correct? Not Bandon. We're here because it's tiny houses. It means you're starting to look for something smaller, it's more affordable. But the obstructions that you see are typically regulations. In this area alone, you have Unit 1, 2, 3, 4, Sprague River, Ferguson Mountain, Oregon Pines, and I can go on. These people are attracted to Klamath County because of one thing: low property prices. right? Well, that brings in a group of people that doesn't have a lot of economic mobility. They don't make $100,000 a year, but they're subjected to the same regulations that people that are. If you have, okay, like let's take a look at Unit 4. You have 1,500 lots there, and you want septic systems that can accommodate 450 gallons of water per day, even though there's no water there. If you were to accomplish that, though, you realize that's 22 million gallons of water per month in an area which is drought stricken. How would that affect your farmer and your community? What I'm saying is that your regulations don't meet reality.
Thank you for the feedback. And that's why we're here. That's why we're here, is to gather this information so we can help work on this. So the gentleman in front of you next to Dale, you get a question and then we're gonna move on.
Actually, thank you for the feedback. A lot of the questions you brought up in the problems bring forth something to solve. Without those questions, we can't even start to have that conversation. The comps, as Jennifer brought up earlier, were huge. And it's something we talked about because people can't loan on something if we don't know what it's worth. And the bank needs to know that so they can finance on something like that. And just one comment on, I think Aaron Noble, I've used your guys' ready-built plans personally on pole barns. I think they're great. So I do believe that it would merit a plan that's pre-approved. I've used it myself as a contractor. So I think it shows something.
Cool. Christine, I'll actually give you a question that we're gonna work on.
My question is just to the bank. He talked a lot about personal finance, but if we approach you as a business and then we go for business capital and all of that, that is an opportunity.
Yeah.
Assuming that it's going to be outside of the parameters that we just spoke about. And then my other, I guess it's more of a comment or a statement, speaking to the financial situation, you did mention that there's going to be $1 million grant coming down the pipeline, so that is an opportunity for you to acquiesce funds for your low income thing that we have going on. So we're here today to just think outside the box and all come together and work on this. And I know emotions are really high, especially in the lower income sector, and so I just want to decompress us a little bit.
Thank you.
And then if you could just speak then about business finance.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm the director of the consumer lending side. We do have business lending as well, so sometimes my mind goes to that, which is community. So, for that angle of someone that wants to invest in, whether it's cottage or, RV park style, that sort of thing, there is definitely commercial lending available. That has its own barriers of, needing to have your financials and your down payment and all that sort of thing. But there's a lot of investors that see the opportunity there. We haven't done a lot. I know we've financed a couple RV parks and or, parks, that sort of thing. So there is opportunity as a local institution. We're interested in having those conversations. And there's lending opportunities as far as the commercial business side.
Another avenue, this grant money available, can I submit a proposal and plan to do a cluster or RV or our tiny homes area that's going to be a benefit to the county, an income for the county, and to house people? Would I come to you, Eric, at the planning department with a proposal on that? Could we get some of this grant money to put together a public cluster or?
I have no grant money.
Yeah, I think the confusion was Mark said that he was working off of a grant. We did, the Board of Commissioners allocated funds for half-price building. That is a grant for the building permits. That's through our community development department. That is available.
So in case it would be private enterprise and following through this. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I can follow up on that.
Sure. Steph, and then I'm gonna move us on.
The half price is not just for building permits, it's for planning on-site and building.
Yeah.
If it's a stick-built home.
I understand the building. Very good, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So where I want us to go, we've done our presentations. Alan is here to answer questions, but I didn't necessarily ask him to make a presentation. What I think I'm gonna do, I'm gonna check our time. Okay, we have 40 minutes max together. My thought was that we could go through an exercise where we identify things we need to, basically next steps, things we need to research, barriers that we can work on. and then opportunities. Does that sound like how we wanna move forward, or do we have additional questions for Alana? I like to come out of a meeting with more of, we didn't just talk about it, we identified things that we can actually work on. How do people feel about that? People wanna do that, okay. So, first, I think financing, and I feel so bad that I feel like we're picking on you, but I feel like financing is one that we definitely need to deep dive into. How do people feel about putting that up as a topic and then identifying things under it and then going to something else? Is everyone okay with that? Cool? Okay, so under financing, for those in the room, what do you think we need to do to start deep diving into that? What are the
Changing the rules at the loan part. It's not an RV, it's not a house, so changing those rules and those specifications, I think they need to start working on that. Or finding out what those are.
Okay, what are other thoughts?
Has anyone visited with OHCS, Oregon Housing and Community Services, in terms of grants? Or with our ownership, we have a lot of funding through OHCS. So Jennifer, have you talked with them? Have you met with other lenders? Perhaps had a conversation with more detail? That's my curiosity.
So I have not met with OHCS. I probably called just about every lender in the area to see if they will lend on them. No. There are some lenders out of the area that do manufactured homes that have expressed willingness to do it, but we haven't gotten anything through yet.
Jennifer, I don't know, have you heard, I haven't talked to anyone at Rogue, but I heard that they can finance a trailer in a park.
Yes.
Where most people need to be detitled part of the land. Is that maybe an opportunity for something like the type of tiny homes on wheels that you're building that they can help finance?
If it were a park model tiny home, Rogue would likely be able to finance it. But again, we haven't encountered that situation to see it currently closed.
You haven't seen it, okay.
But I think it would be.
I was kind of curious, I might pick their brain about, how that works, and I know it brings on extra risk, and I'm curious how to mitigate that, so.
Okay, other thoughts on the financing? First of all, does somebody directly wanna take this OHCS piece and run with it? Or does that get assigned to me, if nobody else will take it? Okay, I'll look into it. Other financing pieces.
Kelly, we had, so at the Casita Summit a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, there was an individual there from USDA. And she made some good points about opportunities in partnering with USDA. I don't know if that's something that we should consider.
Yes. Margie Hoffman.
Did they have any specific for like tiny home programs?
No, they talked about communities where they helped develop, I don't know if it was like 15 or 30 homes in a community, but I mean, I feel like they have.
They have so many programs, right? You only think of like a couple
It was just
of them.
like a 10-minute presentation, so I don't think we really got everything that they do.
Well, and I don't know if this struck you, Misty, but I was struck by USDA, Department of Ag, and the main thing they do is housing. And I don't think anybody in the room knew that. So that's a great point. And Randy can help follow up.
They're really hard programs to get a house loan through. They
Are
can
they?
be, yeah.
Cause she said they had, I don't know, like 100, I'm exaggerating probably, but
I mean,
she said they had a lot.
some sellers will not accept a USDA offer, the zero down.
I would like to speak to that. So the USDA loans have a negative connotation often. I've never had a problem getting one through. They've never taken any longer than any of the other loan types that I've dealt with. I think it's an awesome program. For those of you who don't know, USDA often provides zero down payment loans to very low income borrowers. It's an amazing program. I love it. They have the same requirements for USDA loans as the FHA loans, very similar at least, if not identical. It's an awesome program for low income borrowers in our area. There is an income cap on those, so if you make too much money, you don't qualify for that. But I think looking at USDA, their 15 to 30 home plus clusters, that could definitely be a potential way that we can help very low income borrowers get into housing at an affordable rate with little to nothing out of pocket.
Other thoughts on the financing front?
Yeah, so I am trying to put together a group of community partners to attend the Oregon Housing and Community Services or Institute, the Oregon Supportive Housing Institute, and it's a 10-day training over the summer, and they want to see a group of community partners commit to learning all about everything to do with permanent supportive housing, which is financing, development, and then supportive services. And then at the end of that, once we have a cohort go through, we're eligible to apply for some pretty big grants from OHCS to fund a permanent supportive housing project here in Klamath. And so I just wanted to throw that out there as an option. I've talked to some people in the room already about it, and they've expressed interest, but we're still looking for like a developer, and yeah, so that could be an option. This would definitely be on like the permanent side, so it would need to have foundations and apply to the codes and everything. And I think it would be really cool if we could create kind of like, we keep talking about the clusters. I think it'd be cool if we could create kind of like a tiny home cluster sort of village here, maybe like, 8 to 15 homes that are permanent supportive housing, because this is going to be very targeted on chronically homeless, extremely low income individuals. And I think having kind of that community aspect where they're all, coming off the streets, trying to improve their income, get their lives together would be like a really big way to motivate them and bring them, keep them in that, because the entire idea is the permanence of it, rather than,
I love that, and I have a dream about something very similar for people coming out of substance abuse, recovery on that side.
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do, a lot of the people will likely have gone through that kind of thing. So, I've already talked to Klamath Basin Behavioral Health, and they want to partner with us and provide addiction treatment and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Is there, how should people get a hold of you if they're interested in that?
Yeah, I can leave my business cards over on the table, but I work at Klamath and Lake Community Action Services. My email is just nolanc@class.org. So.
Okay, cool. Other thoughts on the financing side? Are there, since we do have representation from Congressman Bentz's office, is there anything that any of the partners have identified as like a federal barrier? And so now I'm putting you on the spot, Joey. If there's a federal barrier that Joey can take back to the congressman, is there anything on that level that we know of? Oh, well, you don't have to change any laws today. That's great.
Commissioner Minzy, maybe I can point out, I'm not a barrier, but an opportunity. One of the areas where I've seen some positive partnerships on tiny homes development is with the VA for veterans housing. And so that might be an area worth exploring when looking for partners.
Thank you. That's a good
One
one.
of the main commonalities I see in the tiny home communities for low income folks across the country is they design community into their space. So most of them will have some sort of community gardens as a part of it. They'll have a community gathering space. They'll often have a community like laundry facilities, because most tiny homes aren't quite big enough for that. So it's part of the fabric of how these are typically built is to foster that sense of community that you mentioned.
If you're putting up VA, would you also want to put up senior citizens to downsize the community base?
Did everyone hear Denise?
No.
Denise,
All right, guys. Senior citizens also, along with the VA. Keep a community for them would be nice too.
This is a good list. Anything else on the financing? Okay.
I just want to point out that when we talk about financing, whether it's commercial or private lending, we're not considering the opportunity cost of having these temporarily housed or homeless or whatever you want to call it populations, and that we are not considering the full system, so whether it's a 7% mortgage or 9% mortgage, it doesn't really add out because it's not considering the opportunity cost of having someone couch surfing or homeless. And I don't understand that number, and I wish we had a number or a range of numbers that we could put to that to say, you know, this is the actual cost, what it's costing Klamath County, not that we can't finance it. Because the government is printing $500 million a day, it's just paper, right? But what's the actual human cost of keeping cyber down?
Well, I like how you said that, and I would add to that something that I've said a lot is that we're paying no matter what. We're paying in all kinds of different ways, right? I mean, classes here, you're paying in certain ways. DHS is paying in certain ways. Correction pays in certain ways. I mean, this is costing money. It's how do we do it in the way that's most supportive of humans and compassionate and also most cost effective, I think is sort of my spin off of exactly what you said.
Could you find that number?
Yeah, how do we find that number?
Yeah.
I mean, I like to be an optimist, but I almost think it's impossible because it's across so many sectors of government. But I think we all know government spends money on people. So could we spend it in a way that was more effective and more humane?
Did you say it?
So the number you're looking for is the number how much the state has spent on trying to house houseless individuals, or what's the number exactly?
Well, I mean, the state and federal and, you know, because, again, through things like DHS, which I mean is your wheelhouse.
Right.
But there's just so many ways that government spends money on people, whether it's people with SUDS, mental health, houselessness. So we should be able to spend it in this way.
Let me see if I can help you figure that. It might take me a while, but.
Brian, did you have a succinct way for me to put that up here?
No,
No,
I never did.
just a comment.
Just the opportunity cost.
Opportunity cost, thank you.
Well, kind of way up the other side of that though, if we have a tiny home community for those, say, who are traveling nurses or doing business remotely, we have a lot of contractors who come in and need to stay in a hotel throughout the week. Instead, they could stay at a tiny home community. So we have, or even, you know, students that come and go. Like, so there are people that are going to, in the future, be, you know, a part of the society that, you know, brings success and financial, you know, endeavors to us who kind of outweigh those who have gotten themselves into, you know, a state where they can't even care for themselves. And so let's look towards, you know, housing for those type of people who have remote businesses. You know, I have a space in my home that I rent out, and through the last year, seeing who travels through, I'm getting, you know, those types of people. And so they're hustling hard and contributing to society. So let's not forget that side of it as well. Those who have transient jobs, you know, that have to work out of town all the time. That's another opportunity for them to house in a community, even if it's a temporary, you know, bi-week or monthly kind of thing.
There might be a lot of those type of workers in the next 5 years too.
And more as we go more mobile and remote, and brick and mortar kind of goes the wayside.
Thanks, Christine. Ian.
And this is more common for our friends at the state. So, and I'll just address the city piece, but by the time you stack city system development charges, which we are required by the state to implement for water, sewer, parks, things like that, we're required to have those. We can't waive those fees for, say, low-income housing. We can't waive it for tiny houses because it's based on meter size and things like that. And the only way we can reduce them is because of the state law is that we have to backfill them from somewhere else. We have to go find additional, we can't just not collect, if you will. We have to actually pay it from another fund somewhere else. And this because the state prohibits us from waiving and not collecting. It would be nice if we could just say, we're not gonna collect it, we'll reduce it, but our fees have to be the same across the board based on sewer size, on water meter size, all of those things. And the state has put in additional restrictions, and they've kind of tied the hands of all the municipalities across the state in being able to do things with SDC charges and credits. So that's something that, and again, our charges are about $14,000 for a single family unit compared to somewhere like Bend where it's $70,000. So we're significantly cheaper, but we cannot do further things because we don't have an additional pot of money to give those credits. So it'd be nice if the state gave the cities money to be able to offset those fees further for people building. Are you following me?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we don't set the SDC policy at building codes. My goodness. You can certainly waive building fees, and it sounds like you guys have a cool program. But I will just flag, I think, related to SDCs, is the infrastructure cost of building out housing, right? And who bears that cost? Is that on the developer? Is that on the local government? What does that look like? And I know, the governor's housing bill is moving through the legislature right now, and it has a lot of money for infrastructure. And one of the themes for developers is just like, it doesn't pencil, the SDCs are so high. I agree with you. I don't have a solution to that problem, but it's a serious problem.
I've actually read the bill, and it's only providing funds for infrastructure for low to moderate income housing. Meaning, like in this area, it's up to 120% of median family income, which means a family of four has to make less than, say, $52,000 to be able to qualify for that. So you get $1 more than that, you're not really qualifying for it. So we are really struggling in the missing middle. The people that make just a tiny little bit more money than to be able to qualify for some of the low to moderate income housing programs, but they're not making enough money to be able to then go into the private development market themselves. So there's like that, we're starting to call it the missing middle.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, a rising tide lifts all boats, right? We are short in every single housing type, and we all benefit from growing more housing of all types. And I really hope that we will resist the urge to over-design some of these programs. Anyway, yeah, I agree. I wish I had a better, solution to that problem. It's a pretty tough, challenging issue to navigate, but it is really important.
Thank you.
So in our last 20 minutes, I thought we could shift to, at the very least, and then if we have additional things we can do it, identifying if there are regulatory pieces that whether state, county, federal could work on, we will. But a quick, does everyone know what SDCs are? The system development charges. Okay. We try not to use acronyms too much.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. Yes.
So what you're about to do and the brainstorming you're doing, this gentleman's clearly read it, but HPAC has spent the last year working on a lot of these issues, trying to remove barriers. And I believe she addressed about 4 of them earlier, but the list is about 58 items from
69 pages.
Yeah, 69 pages if you want to read it. But if you look that up and you're interested and you have the time, there's a lot of stuff. Whether they get passed or not, they are brainstorming ideas, but it's all around local jurisdictions, and a lot of stuff that people here are concerned and talking about.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
You could even watch recorded 2-hour Zoom meetings as they go through their discussions since last March, if you're interested.
And everyone knows what that is, the housing
Production
policy.
Advisory
Production. Okay. Thank you. And to be honest, I wasn't aware that committee existed. So this is part of why it's good to get in a room with people with different levels of experience.
Alana might be able to speak more to it, but I believe it's in short session now, the list of 58 recommendations. And I believe the concern is high enough at the state that it's being fast tracked. So maybe in the next 2 months, some of the restrictions that come from the state down to local jurisdictions may have some wiggle.
Yeah, and I'll stick a link to the HPAC website and report in the chat here if that's helpful to folks. And it was a really great process and so many parallels to the conversation you're having today. In terms of just getting people in a room and hashing out what are the problems and what are the solutions. And they made a bunch of recommendations, and several of those are in the governor's housing bill. Some of them don't require a bill, some of them are kind of more directed agency action. And they tackled, all questions big and small, including, you know, our taxation system in the state and how we fund development and that kind of thing. So I'll stick a link in the chat. I think it really, it was a great conversation because there were no limits. It was kind of throw everything against the wall, and they really did, and there are some interesting ideas in there. So I know as agencies, right now those recommendations are with the governor. Some of them are moving in the legislature right now, some of them are kind of for future consideration or for long session. But there are a lot of good ideas in there. I'll put a link to the report in the chat.
Yeah, I have a question, because you said that the laws are gonna change in 2026, and that's quite a ways out there, and then that the building official could waive the, you know, the sprinkler requirements and things like that. Is that being suggested, or is that up to the still local building official?
So the law included as what's called a sunset provision, which means basically it goes away in 2026 and then reverts to that other one I referenced. So if nothing happens, that change will happen in 2026. Like I said, the most exciting part of which is that tiny houses will come back into prefab. But the legislature has an opportunity in 2025, I'm gonna lose track of what year it is here, but in that long session to change their mind about that approach. So it's not that a law has to be passed, it's that like if no law is passed, the law will go away. And the building official will still have flexibility, but I think if we can get them into the prefab program and take away the distinction based on size and just focus on sleeping lofts and what the appropriate provisions are for that, that's my thought on that.
Other thoughts in the.
Did that answer your question? Sorry.
Yeah. What else do we need to capture? Either the Klamath Tribes or Chiloquin, do you guys have any additional thoughts for your own, what you're working with?
So, in regards to the homeless issue, I think having a clear understanding of the permanent supportive housing model and the different levels that are involved in there could tackle the homeless issue. So I have nothing to do with the tiny home, because that's the health part of the tribe that has the tiny homes here in town. They're designed for people who are like the second step up in the permanent supportive housing model in the continuum of care. The first one is people who can't live behind doors, and I found out the hard way why you don't do that for homeless people. So that model's for people on the second step. Further up and towards the opposite end of the permanent supportive housing model in the continuum of care are people who are homeless, and that's the Melitas Project. They're for elders and who can live on their own, who can support themselves. They just need a place to live. And we have, good Lord, 50 people that need a place tonight. So I think breaking down the model not only for the Klamath Tribes, but for Klamath County in general, identify targets in that continuum of care model to go after that and go after funding for that. Because there's funding out there, there's a lot of funding for permanent supportive housing and housing in general. So I guess breaking down the model and attack it in pieces would be a good idea. And regulations, changing regulations would be great. We have 2 small tiny homes that we purchased. Those are 450 square feet, something like that. And I can't put them in Chiloquin where I want to put them because their square footage, that's an issue. It's just finding out where we're going to do them. And then going back to the KCC model, we need people to work. I could hire people right now that have carpentry skills who are higher up on the chain and build. I could employ them today, but we cannot find people to work. And the tribes pay very well. And then just a side note, when I moved here from New Mexico last March, actually, you can't find a place to live. I was staying at the Cerulean for a couple months, and that was $1,200 a month for a small room and a kitchen. And then I found another even more expensive small place to live in for a month. But that's just the realities of living here in Klamath Falls, Oregon. And I was very surprised about the cost of living here. It's very expensive. I came from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and it blows that away completely. And everybody's saying, well, we don't have a grocery sheets tax. Well, thank God, because this would be very expensive.
Thank you. And I remember how excited the tribes were to get you, and so I'm so glad you're here, and thank you for sharing your feedback. Chilipun?
Yeah, so our focus lately has been on kind of addressing that issue, our codes and ordinances, and how we can accommodate what we've been talking about here, tiny homes, transitional. So we did get awarded a technical grant from DLCD. We not too long ago turned over all of our ordinances and codes to their consultants who are working on the project. I guess it was 4 other cities that they awarded several grants to. We're in the process of putting together a housing advisory committee because very soon we'll start getting that feedback from DLCD's consultants that will then go through the advisory committee and eventually work its way back up to the council. Ultimately, we're hoping to either change our codes and ordinances, maybe start with a new model code that will come out of all this. We're not sure what the final end product is, but this all started because we did have actually not just the tribes, we've had quite a few residents looking at putting in an ADU unit or a tiny home or things along that line because the example we're talking about, there's not the housing there's not the money there. So far it seems like a lot of people have their own money, they're waiting for the codes to change so they can act and do it. So that's what we're going right now. But I do also have in the back of my head the fear that as we make all this happen, which I'm very supportive of, hearing comments from other cities through the League of Oregon Cities, is they're concerned with, as we start to create all these lower cost homes, they'll get gobbled up and they'll get turned around and sold or rented at high. So in the end, we're not really solving the problem for people who can't afford homes. So I think that's something we have to be careful of and make sure that as we make it possible for these tiny homes and other types of building to be implemented, that it's still not just going to be gobbled up and priced out of a range of people. So
Great thoughts, Robert. Ian, and then will somebody give me a time check? What do we got?
It's 10 minutes.
Okay, 10 minutes.
I was just gonna add that with a lot of the small homes, we've been studying it in other markets. A lot of investors are picking them up with short-term rentals. And there's investment trusts now. It's not just a person buying it, some house to do short-term rentals. You've now got, venture capital funds and real estate investment trusts that are buying up and doing large-scale residential rentals for either the short-term rentals or the rental for-profit market, especially when it's the less than 1,500 square foot houses, which tend to fall on the more affordable side of the metric, and it's really taking them out of the hands of the average. It's stopping the average working family getting on that kind of the ladder. And I know we had a lot of pushback when we started talking about even regulating short-term rentals, and people were like, no, you can't do it. But it's something that it's really driving stopping a lot of folks that are working families getting on the housing ladder.
So since we only have a few minutes left, this is what I think I want to do with everyone's permission. Board staff, Haley, we will work on getting these written down. If everyone has signed in with their email address, we'll sort of send the notes back out. I think we'll leave this room open for a little bit so people can connect with each other. I want to give Alana a chance to say last thoughts, and then is there anything sort of moving forward, big thing that you think we're missing?
I think just on this one, I would have clear and concise definitions of what small homes are. Klamath Ben just voted down 4-3 not to allow RVs, mobile RVs, to be rented units outside of residence as ADU. And so I think we get caught up. I think Jennifer did a good job explaining the 4 types of small homes, but we sometimes forget a 1985 van can be a small home too, as defined by Senate Bill 1013. And so it'll come before the planning department in the county at some point in time for those definitions to be clear.
So, Alana, our distinguished keynote, any last thoughts you would like to share or advice you would give to our community?
And thank you so much for having me today. I too am kind of an optimist, and these kinds of conversations make me really hopeful. You know, when we put our heads together, we can solve tough problems, and they can feel really intractable. And our housing problem is one of those problems that can feel impossible. But you know, we've got to bite the deal or eat the elephant one bite at a time. And so, if there's any support or follow up that we can offer from the state, we're ready, willing, and able to do that. And I think because this is I appreciated whoever made the comment that this is not new. It's like there are innovative things happening, but we've been able to solve these kinds of problems before, and I'm optimistic we'll be able to again. So thank you so much for having me, and please let me know if there's anything I can do to help as you continue to work on this issue in Plymouth County.
We will. Thank you, Alana. Can we give a round of applause for our